She looks just like her. Train her. Use her. She was never meant to be a spy, never meant to be a weapon. But when you look like the world's most dangerous woman, the world makes you dangerous. Now, she's caught in a war she never asked for, hunted by those who trained her, chased by the woman she was forced to become. To survive, she must outthink the agency that built her. To win, she must become something more. A player, a threat. The only way out is through the fire. You wanted a ghost? You got one. The night was supposed to be ordinary. Evelyn Carter wrapped her coat tighter around her as she exited the small cafe on the corner of 57th Street, her mind still lingering on the investigative piece she had been working on. The city hummed around her, neon signs flickering against the damp pavement as the evening drizzle turned to steady rain. She adjusted her bag over her shoulder, barely noticing the black sedan parked across the street. If she had, she might have realized it had been there for hours. She might have run, but she didn't. The moment she stepped onto the crosswalk, 3 unmarked SUVs skidded onto the street, tires screeching against the asphalt. She barely had time to gasp before masked agents in tactical gear stormed out, guns raised. On the ground now. Evelyn froze, heart hammering. She turned her head, half expecting someone else to be standing behind her, someone this level of force was actually meant for. But there was no one. They were coming for her. A second passed, then another. Her instinct screamed at her to run. She turned. A sharp blow struck her in the ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. Her knees buckled as hands gripped her arms, twisting them behind her back. Cuffs snapped around her wrists. She barely managed to choke out a "what the hell" before a black hood dropped over her head, plunging her into darkness. The world spun as she was yanked forward, her feet barely touching the pavement before she was thrown into the back of one of the SUVs. The last thing she heard before the doors slammed shut was a voice. Cold, commanding. "We got her!" Then everything was gone. Evelyn had no idea how long she had been unconscious. The first thing she noticed when she came to was the biting cold of metal against her skin. Her wrists were still bound, her ankles too. A dim, flickering light overhead cast long, eerie shadows against the bare concrete walls. She was in some kind of interrogation room. The air smelled sterilely too clean. She tried to move. A sharp pain shot through her side. They hadn't been gentle. Before she could process anything else, the door creaked open. A man stepped inside. Tall, military posture, dark tactical gear that looked like it had seen 1,000 operations before tonight. His piercing blue eyes locked onto her with unsettling precision. Evelyn swallowed hard. She didn't know who he was, but she knew one thing. He was dangerous. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, folding his hands on the metal table. His gaze never wavered. Then he spoke. "Celeste Noir, we finally caught you." Evelyn blinked, her breath hitched. Celeste Noir. She had heard that name before on the news, in whispers of intelligence reports. The most wanted woman in the world. A ghost. A myth. A criminal mastermind who had evaded Interpol for years. And now, they thought she was her? Her pulse pounded in her ears. "You have the wrong person," she said, voice steadier than she expected. The man smirked, shaking his head. "No, Celeste. You've played this game for too long. But it's over now." Evelyn's breath quickened. "I'm not her," she repeated, her voice sharper now. The man leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His presence was suffocating. He studied her, eyes scanning her face for any hint of a lie. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A photograph. He slid it across the table. Evelyn looked down, and her heart nearly stopped. It was her. No, not her. It was a woman who looked exactly like her. Same high cheekbones, same hazel eyes, same dark auburn hair. The only difference? The woman in the picture held a gun to a man's temple. Blood splattered across her cheek, and she was smiling. Evelyn's stomach twisted. The man leaned in, his voice low. "Tell me, Celeste, how do you want this to go?" Evelyn forced herself to breathe. She had 2 choices, She could keep fighting, convince them of their mistake. Or she could play along, figure out who Celeste Noir really was, why she looked exactly like her, and most importantly, why she was being hunted. Her pulse slowed. She lifted her eyes to meet his. And she made her choice. "All right," she said, voice calm. "Let's talk." The man's smirk returned. "Good answer." Evelyn sat in the cold interrogation room, her wrists raw from the restraints. The man across from her, Agent Damien Crawsh, hadn't blinked once since she agreed to talk. His smirk lingered, sharp and calculating. The air between them felt dangerous. A silent game of chess neither had agreed to play, but both understood had already begun. Cross leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "You're going to work for us." Evelyn frowned. "Excuse me? You want to survive?" Cross asked. "You become Celeste Noir. We train you, use you to lure her out." Evelyn's heart pounded. "You think she'll just walk into a trap?" Cross tilted his head. "We don't set traps, Miss Carter. We create them." A shiver ran down her spine. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Cross exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Then you disappear." His words settled like ice in her chest. He wasn't exaggerating. No trial, no proof of innocence, no escape. Just like that, Evelyn Carter would cease to exist. She forced herself to breathe. She had no way out, no lifeline to call. The only way forward was through. So she lifted her chin, steadied her voice, and said the only thing she could. "Fine, train me." Cross smiled. "Good choice." The next few hours were a blur. Evelyn was escorted out of the interrogation room, blindfolded again, and shoved into a vehicle. She tried to count turns, track time, but they were deliberately disorienting her. When the blindfold was yanked away, she found herself in an underground military facility, hidden beneath an old warehouse. The walls were made of reinforced steel. The air smelled of sweat and gunpowder. The moment she stepped inside, a massive digital display lit up on the far wall. A name appeared: Celeste Noir. Beneath it, an Interpol file flashed with words like assassin, arms dealer, espionage, high-value target. Evelyn swallowed hard. A woman stepped forward, tall, platinum blonde, and built like she could break bones with a look alone. Agent Valeria Monroe. Her piercing blue eyes scanned Evelyn with a mix of doubt and amusement. "This is her?" Monroe scoffed. "She looks soft." Evelyn stiffened. Cross smirked. "Not for long." Monroe turned to Evelyn, folding her arms. "You think you can pretend to be Celeste Noir? She was trained since childhood. You're just, what, a journalist?" Evelyn met her gaze. "I'm a fast learner." Monroe raised an eyebrow. "We'll see." She turned to the team. "Lock her in. Training starts now." Evelyn barely had time to breathe before she was thrown into hell. The first test? Survival. She was shoved into a pitch-black concrete room with no food, no bed, no windows. 48 hours passed. No sleep, no human contact, just the sound of water dripping somewhere distant. By the time they pulled her out, she was dizzy, exhausted, starving. Cross stood there, watching her stumble. "Celeste Noir wouldn't beg," he said, tossing a gun at her feet. Evelyn stared at it. "Pick it up," Monroe ordered. Her hands trembled as she did. The weight was foreign, terrifying. Monroe stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Your instincts are weak. That's going to get you killed." Evelyn steadied herself. "Then train me." Monroe smiled coldly. "I intend to." The next few weeks were brutal. Evelyn's body ached in places she didn't know existed. Her knuckles were raw from striking punching bags. Her muscles screamed from endless hand-to-hand combat drills. Monroe was relentless. Celeste doesn't hesitate. Celeste doesn't second-guess. Celeste wins. Evelyn was thrown, pinned, knocked to the ground again and again. But she always got back up. Tactics, disguises, weapons training. They stripped her down and rebuilt her into someone stronger, faster, deadlier. The first time she disarmed an opponent, Monroe actually looked impressed. "She's learning," Cross mused. Monroe grunted. Not fast enough. One night, Evelyn was woken by the blaring of an alarm. 2 agents dragged her from bed, threw her into a black SUV, and drove into the city. When they stopped, she found herself in a lavish casino in Monaco. Her hands were clean, her body dressed in a sleek black gown, hair pinned into an elegant updo. She barely had time to process before Cross pressed a small earpiece into her palm. Inside that room, he whispered, nodding toward a VIP lounge, is a man who Celeste Noir would kill without hesitation. Prove you can be her. Evelyn's pulse spiked. This was it, the first real test. She squared her shoulders, adjusted the slit of her dress, and stepped forward. The world blurred around her. She wasn't Evelyn Carter anymore. She was Celeste Noir. The air inside the Monaco casino was thick with wealth and danger. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light over the polished marble floors, the sound of clinking glasses and hushed conversations blending into a melody of quiet indulgence. Evelyn Carter stepped inside, feeling the weight of every gaze that fell upon her. But she wasn't Evelyn Carter anymore. She was Celeste Noir. The black silk gown hugged her figure effortlessly, the thigh-high slit giving her the freedom to move if things turned violent. Her auburn hair was styled in an elegant updo, a few loose strands framing her face, accentuating the striking resemblance to the woman the world feared. A security guard glanced at her as she walked toward the VIP lounge. She didn't flinch. She met his gaze with quiet authority, the way someone like Celeste would. The earpiece in her ear crackled softly, Cross's voice. No hesitation. Celeste owns the room. Now walk like you belong. Evelyn kept her pace steady, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Inside the VIP lounge, a man sat alone at a private table, swirling a glass of whiskey. His name was Dmitry Antonov, a former Russian intelligence officer turned arms dealer. A man who had sold weapons to both governments and terrorists alike, switching sides whenever it suited him. According to the mission file, Celeste and Dmitry had history. Dangerous history. Evelyn approached, her heart hammering, but she didn't let it show. She slid into the seat across from him, crossing her legs. Dmitry's cold blue eyes flicked up from his drink. His lips curled into an amused smile. Celeste Noir, he said in a thick Russian accent, I was beginning to think you were just a ghost. Evelyn's fingers brushed against the stem of her wineglass. Ghosts don't make deals, Dmitry. The words came naturally, as if she had always been Celeste. Dmitry leaned forward, studying her carefully. Yet here you are after all these years. Evelyn felt Cross's voice buzz in her ear. Stay in control. Let him come to you. She took a slow sip of her drink, keeping her eyes locked onto Dmitry's. If you're nervous, I can leave. Dmitry chuckled. No, you intrigue me. You always have. She knew what kind of man Dmitry was. He thrived on power, on control. If she wanted to convince him she was Celeste, she couldn't act like a scared woman in a dress. She had to be the predator. So she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. The last time we met, you tried to have me killed. Dmitry smirked. And you made quite the mess in return. You were hard to find after that. She tilted her head. Maybe you were looking in the wrong places. Dmitry studied her again, eyes narrowing slightly. She could feel his suspicion beneath the surface. Then he reached into his jacket. Evelyn's muscles tensed, but she didn't react. Dmitry pulled out a small velvet box and placed it on the table. A test. Cross's voice was sharp in her ear. Whatever's inside, don't flinch. Evelyn slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a single bullet. She recognized the implication immediately. It was a game some killers played. A challenge. A warning. A message. She lifted the bullet between her fingers, rolling it thoughtfully. Then she smiled. I appreciate the sentiment, she said, but I don't need souvenirs. She dropped the bullet back into the box and pushed it back toward him. Dmitry's smirk widened, something approving in his expression. Ah, Celeste, you never disappoint. The tension in the air eased just slightly. Evelyn had passed the first test, but the night was far from over. Evelyn was just beginning to relax when the door to the VIP lounge swung open. A tall, lean man in a dark suit stepped inside, his icy gaze sweeping the room before locking onto her. Evelyn didn't recognize him, but Dimitri did. His entire demeanor changed, shoulders tightening, fingers twitching toward his concealed weapon. "Celeste," Dimitri murmured, his voice lower now. "We have company." The man in the suit stepped closer. His sharp features were almost unnaturally still, like a mask. His voice was smooth, deliberate. "Celeste Noir." Evelyn turned her head slightly, but she didn't respond. She didn't know this man, but Celeste probably did. And if she played this wrong, she was dead. Cross's voice came through the earpiece, sharp and urgent. "Evelyn, that's Isaac Kane, high-level assassin. If he's here, it means Celeste is already on his list." Evelyn forced herself to breathe. Think, adapt, own the room. She lifted her glass again, taking a slow sip before setting it down. Then she leaned back in her chair, finally meeting Kane's gaze. "If you're here to kill me," she said smoothly, "you should at least let me finish my drink." Dimitri let out a low chuckle. It was a risky move, but Kane's lips twitched just slightly. He stepped closer. "I'm not here to kill you, not yet." Evelyn tilted her head. "Then what do you want?" Kane pulled out a small folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. Evelyn hesitated before unfolding it. Inside was a photograph. Of her. Not Celeste Noir, her. The blood in her veins turned to ice. Kane smiled coldly. "You see, the real Celeste Noir would have killed me already." Her breath caught. He knew. Before she could react, Kane's hand shot forward. The knife buried into the table just inches from her fingers. "Whoever you are," Kane murmured, leaning in close, "this game just got interesting." Evelyn swallowed hard, because in that moment, she realized something terrifying. Celeste Noir wasn't the only one being hunted. No, so was she. The walls of the Monaco casino felt smaller by the second. Isaac Kane's cold, knowing stare burned into Evelyn's skin as she forced herself to remain calm. The weight of the photograph in her hand was suffocating. She wasn't just pretending to be Celeste Noir anymore. Now she was a liability. Dmitry Antonov shifted beside her, sensing the tension. His fingers inched toward the concealed weapon at his waist. Kane smirked, placing both hands flat on the table in a slow, deliberate movement. He wanted her to know he wasn't in a rush. "Your reaction tells me everything I need to know," Kane said smoothly. Evelyn tightened her grip on the photograph. "Think. Adapt. Turn the tables." She exhaled, leaned back in her chair, and gave him a smirk of her own. Celeste Noir wouldn't show fear. "And what, exactly? Do you think you know?" Kane's icy gaze didn't waver. "That you are not Celeste Noir." Silence. Dmitri frowned slightly, his calculating mind working overtime. The entire mission was crumbling in real time. Evelyn had seconds to decide what happened next. She slowly set down the photograph, folded it in half, and slid it back toward Kane. "If you knew that for certain, I'd already be dead." Dmitri let out a quiet chuckle. Good. That meant he wasn't convinced yet. Kane tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. Clever. Then, in a blur, he moved. His hand shot forward, grabbing Evelyn by the wrist, pulling her toward him across the table. Pain exploded in her shoulder. Dmitri shot to his feet, but Kane was faster, pulling out a pistol and pressing it against Evelyn's ribcage under the table. Nobody in the casino could see it. Nobody knew how close she was to dying. "If you're not Celeste Noir," Kane whispered, "then what are you?" Evelyn met his gaze, breathing through the sharp pain in her arm. She could lie. She could try to run. Or she could play his game. So she smiled. "I'm the woman who's about to ruin your plans." And with that, she stomped on his foot, hard. Kane flinched just enough. Evelyn twisted free, grabbing the knife from the table and driving it straight into his gun hand. Gunfire erupted. Dmitri flipped the table, pulling his own weapon and firing at Kane's men. Evelyn ducked low, heart pounding, adrenaline burning through her veins. "Move, Celeste!" Dimitri barked, grabbing her by the wrist and dragging her through the chaos. She barely had time to process what was happening. Her cover was in ruins. Isaac Kane was bleeding, and every hired gun in the building was now looking for her. The two of them burst out of the VIP lounge and into the main casino. Panic had already begun to spread, guests ducking for cover as more armed men flooded in from the front entrance. Dimitri didn't hesitate. He grabbed a bottle from a waiter's tray, smashed it on the edge of the bar, and flung the flaming liquid toward the security guards. A wall of fire erupted, buying them seconds. They ran through the casino floor, down a hallway lined with velvet curtains, straight toward the back exit, only to come face to face with more armed guards. Evelyn barely had time to react before Dimitri shoved her aside and started firing. He was covering her. She didn't waste it. She grabbed a discarded gun from one of the downed guards and moved. Bullets tore through the air. She sprinted down a side hall, her mind racing. She had to get out fast. Then, through an open doorway, she saw it. An idling motorcycle parked inside a maintenance corridor. Jackpot. Evelyn sprinted toward it. A bullet whizzed past her shoulder. She didn't slow. She jumped onto the bike, kicked the ignition, and peeled out into the night. The streets of Monaco blurred around her as Evelyn weaved through traffic, tires screeching on the slick pavement. The roar of 3 black SUVs filled the air behind her. Isaac Kane's men. The earpiece in her ear crackled to life. "Evelyn, where the hell are you?" "Cross." She gritted her teeth, dodging between 2 cars. "Little busy, Cross." "We're tracking you head toward the marina. We have an extraction team inbound." Evelyn cut the handlebars hard, narrowly missing a line of parked cars. One of the SUVs pulled up beside Harriman, leaned out the window, aiming a gun. She acted on instinct. She yanked the bike left, slamming into the side of the vehicle. The man lost Balance's shot went wide. Evelyn grabbed his wrist, twisted, and yanked. He tumbled from the SUV, crashing onto the pavement. The remaining cars closed in. Evelyn spotted the turn ahead, a sharp downhill slope leading straight to the marina. No choice. She gunned the engine. The wind howled around her as she sped toward the docks. The SUVs followed, their headlights bright and blinding. And then, gunfire. Not from the SUVs. From the docks. Evelyn's stomach flipped. Ahead, standing beside an unmarked black speedboat, Agent Monroe fired a rifle, taking out the SUV tires. The vehicles spun out, crashing into each other. Evelyn ditched the bike mid-motion, rolling onto the docks, barely missing the edge of the water. Cross was there, grabbing her arm. "We need to go now." Evelyn didn't argue. She stumbled onto the boat, breathing hard. The engines roared to life. Monroe tossed her a towel. "Welcome to the real world," she muttered. Evelyn just exhaled, chest rising and falling, as she tried to process what had just happened. She had barely survived. But she had survived. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't Evelyn Carter anymore. She was becoming Celeste Noir, and she wasn't sure where the line was anymore. The speedboat cut through the dark waters of the Mediterranean, the hum of its powerful engine the only sound in the still night. Evelyn sat at the back, gripping the steel railing, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline crash. She was alive, but barely. Across from her, Agent Valeria Monroe watched with her usual cool detachment. The woman hadn't said much since they pulled her from the docks in Monaco, but she didn't have to. The look on her face said it all. Evelyn had screwed up. She leaned her head back against the cold metal, exhaling sharply. Her ribs ached from the fall off the bike, her hands were scraped raw, and the image of Isaac Kane's knowing smirk was burned into her brain. He knew. He knew she wasn't Celeste Noir. And that meant every assassin, mercenary, and crime syndicate that feared Celeste would be coming for her. Her cover was cracked. Maybe not fully broken, but it was enough. The earpiece in her ear crackled. "Evelyn." Cross's voice. No amusement, no patience. She sighed and pressed a hand against her temple. I know. I messed up. Messed up? Cross's voice sharpened. You nearly got yourself killed. Do you realize what would have happened if Monroe hadn't extracted you? Evelyn opened her eyes, staring at the dark waves rushing past. I'd be dead. Exactly. There was a long pause. Then, in a calmer voice, he asked, What happened in there? Evelyn hesitated. She could lie. She could downplay Kane's suspicion. But she was tired of games. He knew, she admitted. Isaac Kane looked me in the eye and called my bluff. Silence. Then Monroe spoke, her voice low. Are you sure? Evelyn turned to face her. He tested me. Had a photo of me. The real me. Cross cursed on the other end. That means someone else knows. Monroe's expression remained unreadable, but her fingers tapped lightly against her leg, a small sign of unease. If Kane has that intel, Monroe said, then the real Celeste knows by now. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Celeste Noir. The woman she was being forced to become. The woman she was supposed to help them catch. And if she knew Evelyn existed, she wouldn't just let it go. By the time they reached the hidden agency facility, Evelyn was exhausted. She barely remembered stepping off the boat before she was escorted back into the cold underground corridors of the black site. Cross and Monroe led her into a secure briefing room, the walls lined with monitors and surveillance feeds. Waiting for them was Director Adrian Locke, a man of authority, a man who didn't waste time. He didn't sit. He didn't greet her. He just stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his piercing steel-gray eyes locking onto Evelyn like a sniper scope. Tell me, he said, voice smooth as glass. Why are you still alive? Evelyn blinked. Excuse me? Locke gestured toward the monitors. Footage from the Monaco casino flickered across the screens. You were made, Carter. You should be dead. So tell me, why are you sitting here instead of in an unmarked grave? Evelyn clenched her fists, heat rising to her face. Because I fought back! Locke tilted his head. Did you? Monroe spoke up. She adapted under pressure. Kane had her cornered and she turned the situation around. Locke didn't look convinced. Or did he let her go? Evelyn stilled. That thought hadn't crossed her mind. Had Kane spared her on purpose? She swallowed. I don't know. Locke exhaled. Then we have a problem. Cross leaned forward. We need to get ahead of this. If Celeste knows about her, Locke cut him off. Then she's already moving. Evelyn's pulse spiked. What does that mean? Locke turned to her, eyes sharp. It means you're not bait anymore, Carter. A pause. You're the target. Evelyn wasn't given time to process what that meant. Within the hour, she was back in the training bay, reloading and firing rounds into a reinforced target, each shot more precise than the last. Monroe watched her, arms crossed, saying nothing. Evelyn holstered the pistol and turned. Are we going after her? Monroe's gaze was unreadable. Not yet. Evelyn clenched her jaw. You said she knows about me. If she's coming for me, why are we waiting? Monroe took a step closer. Because you're not ready. Evelyn swallowed the retort on her tongue. She was ready. She had to be. Cross entered the room then, tossing a file onto the bench beside her. New mission. You leave in 3 hours. Evelyn grabbed the file, flipping it open. Inside was a photo of a sleek, high-tech facility somewhere deep in Eastern Europe. Typhon Industries, Cross explained. Private intelligence firm. They supply tech to some of the world's most dangerous players, including Celeste Noir. Evelyn frowned, scanning the details. What's the objective? Cross met her gaze. Break in. Steal their list of Celeste's known contacts. Find out who's protecting her. Evelyn exhaled, nodding. Okay. When do we leave? Cross smirked. Glad you asked. He pulled out a passport, placing it in her hands. Evelyn flipped it open. The name on the ID wasn't hers. It wasn't Celeste's either. It was a third identity, one that didn't exist until now. She looked up at him. Cross grinned. Time to see how well you really blend in. The rain drizzled over the city, coating the rooftops in a thin sheen of water that glistened under the glow of the streetlights. Evelyn sat in the back seat of a nondescript sedan, her new passport tucked inside the pocket of her tailored black coat. The name on it read Elena Marquez. A new identity, A new mission. The Typhon Industries building loomed a hidden ultra-modern fortress of steel and glass, surrounded by armed guards and state-of-the-art security. The objective was simple: infiltrate, access the mainframe, extract the list of Celeste Noir's known associates. Get out alive! Cross's voice crackled in her earpiece. How's our girl feeling? Evelyn adjusted the hem of her silk blouse, her outfit meticulously chosen to blend in with the elite clientele inside. She took a slow breath, watching the entrance. Like I'm walking into a lion's den, Cross chuckled. That's because you are. But don't worry, you look like you belong. She didn't reply. She wasn't sure she believed that yet. Monroe's voice followed. No mistakes, Carter. This isn't a casino with a back exit. If they catch you inside, there won't be a firefight. There will just be a body to clean up. Evelyn didn't need the reminder. She exhaled, stepping out of the car and pulling her purse over her shoulder. Time to become Elena Marquez. She strode toward the entrance, head high, posture confident. The security checkpoint loomed ahead of facial recognition scanner. Her pulse spiked. She tapped the disguised contact lens Cross had given her before the mission. A nano-thin projection altered her biometric reading just enough to match a registered guest. She stepped forward. The scanner whirred. A long second passed. Then, access granted. She forced herself not to react. She was in. The interior of Typhon Industries was sleek, expensive, soulless. Everything was white marble, chrome, and security cameras. Men in dark suits whispered in hushed tones. A few women in evening gowns sipped champagne in the executive lounge. To the untrained eye, it looked like a cutting-edge tech firm. But Evelyn knew better. Typhon didn't just build surveillance systems. They built wars. She approached the bar, ordering a drink she had no intention of finishing. Blending in was key. Cross's voice returned in her earpiece. You're clear. The server room is 4 floors down. Security's tight. Monroe cut in. We've uploaded a VIP clearance to your credentials, but you'll have to bypass the biometric locks yourself. Translation: get creative. Evelyn spotted an executive badge clipped to the belt of a man at the far end of the lounge. She adjusted her posture, smiled, and made her move. Excuse me, she purred, brushing past the executive just enough for her bracelet to skim his keycard. The microscanner duplicated the frequency in seconds. He turned, brows furrowing slightly as he glanced at her. She smiled apologetically. I'm so sorry, I swear these heels get taller every time. The man gave her a slow once-over, his demeanor shifting. No harm done. She winked. Buy me a drink later and I'll make it up to you. Then she walked away. The executive was too distracted to realize his keycard no longer worked. Cross's voice hummed with amusement. Carter, remind me to never play cards with you. Evelyn smirked. Smart man. She reached the elevator, tapped the stolen keycard, and the doors slid open. She stepped inside. The doors sealed shut. Now, the real work began. Evelyn descended into Typhon's restricted levels, each floor taking her deeper into the facility's Black Ops division. Security cameras lined every corridor. Guards patrolled the halls. She adjusted the cuff of her blouse, pressing a hidden button. The magnetic pulse Cross had given her flickered the cameras for precisely 4 seconds. Just enough time to disappear into a restricted wing. She moved quickly, ducking through a server room door and locking it behind her. Rows of high-powered computers hummed softly, running the world's deadliest secrets. Evelyn crossed to the mainframe, plugging in the encrypted drive Monroe had prepared. A progress bar flickered onto the screen. 40%, 50%. Her heart pounded. Too slow. Footsteps echoed outside. Security was close. 70%, 80%. A voice outside the door. Who authorized this room? Evelyn's pulse spiked. 90%, 95%. The doorknob twisted. She yanked out the drive, stuffed it into her pocket, and flattened herself behind a row of servers. The door swung open. A Typhon security officer stepped inside. Evelyn didn't breathe. He scanned the room. His gaze flicked to the mainframe, He frowned. A long second passed, then another. Then his radio buzzed. Status check, lower floors. The guard hesitated, then exhaled and stepped back out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Evelyn waited 3 seconds, then bolted. She navigated the corridors, ducking past patrols, heart hammering in her chest. She reached the stairwell, climbing fast, every muscle burning. Cross's voice snapped into her ear. "You're clear, but you need to move. Your cover won't last much longer." She pushed open a side exit, stepping into the dim-lit alley beside the Typhon building. Across the street, a black motorcycle waited. Monroe's voice was sharp. "Get to the rendezvous, now." Evelyn ran. She mounted the bike, revved the engine, and tore through the streets of Budapest, weaving between traffic, heart-pounding. Mission complete. Or so she thought. Because as she turned onto a quiet side road, she spotted it, a black SUV, tailing her. A voice buzzed in her earpiece. Not Cross, not Monroe. A voice she didn't recognize. Smooth, lethal. "You stole from the wrong people, little thief." The blood in Evelyn's veins turned to ice. Because the voice belonged to Celeste Noir. The black SUV kept pace with Evelyn as she weaved through the narrow streets of Budapest. Rain slicked the roads, the headlights behind her casting long shadows through the mist. The voice in her earpiece smooth, controlled, undeniably Celeste Noir sent ice through her veins. "You stole from the wrong people, little thief." Evelyn gripped the throttle of the motorcycle, forcing herself to focus. Celeste knew. Not just that Evelyn had broken into Typhon Industries. She knew exactly who she was. And that meant only one thing. This was a trap. Her pulse thundered. "Cross!" she hissed into the comm. "We have a problem." Silence. Static. Evelyn's breath caught. They had jammed her signal. She was on her own. The SUV suddenly swerved forward, slamming into her rear wheel. Evelyn barely managed to stay upright, the bike skidding sideways. She had seconds to decide. Option 1. Try to outrun them in the city, where more of Celeste's men were likely waiting. Option 2. Lead them somewhere she could control the fight. Her mind worked fast. The Chain Bridge, a narrow, historic bridge over the Danube River. Only 2 lanes. Limited exits. If she could lure them there, she might have a chance. She jerked the handlebars, taking a sharp turn toward the river. Behind her, the SUV's engine roared. They followed. Evelyn gunned the bike down the empty bridge, the wind cutting against her face, the tires skidding on wet pavement. The SUV was gaining. Fast. "One shot, Carter. Make it count." She reached into her jacket, pulled out her sidearm, and twisted just as the SUV slammed forward again. The impact nearly threw her. She gritted her teeth, steadied her aim, and fired. The bullet shattered the SUV's front tire. The driver veered hard, trying to recover. Too late. The vehicle skidded, slammed into the steel railing, and flipped sideways, metal screeching as it crashed onto the pavement. Silence. The only sound was the rain pattering against the wreckage. Evelyn exhaled sharply. Too easy. Her instincts screamed at her. She spun around, and there she was. Celeste Noir. Standing 10 feet away, a pistol trained at Evelyn's head. Flawless. Unshaken. Deadly. Evelyn froze. Celeste tilted her head slightly. "Not bad, but you're not me." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I never claimed to be." Celeste smirked. "Number, but they did." She took a slow step forward. "I've been watching you, little thief, watching how they mold you, twist you, trying to turn you into me." Evelyn didn't move. "What do you want?" Celeste's gray eyes gleamed. "The real question, love, is what do you want?" Evelyn frowned. "You're playing their game," Celeste continued. "You think Cross and Monroe are your allies? That they'll protect you?" She shook her head. "They don't want to stop me," she whispered. "They want to replace me." Evelyn's chest tightened. "You're lying," Celeste smiled. "Am I?" She stepped closer, lowering the gun slightly. "Think about it. Why you? Why not someone trained? Someone already in their system? Evelyn didn't answer, because she had wondered that. Celeste leaned in. They needed a pawn, a perfect copy, someone disposable. Evelyn's pulse pounded. Was it true? Or was Celeste just trying to get in her head? Celeste's voice softened. You don't have to be their puppet, Evelyn. Hearing her real name from Celeste's lips sent a shiver through her. Celeste held out a hand. Come with me. Evelyn's breath caught, and for the first time, she didn't know what to do. Evelyn's breath came in slow, measured beats as she stood on the rain-slicked bridge, staring into the unreadable, steel-gray eyes of Celeste Noir, the woman who had been nothing but a myth, a fugitive. A name whispered in fear and power was standing right in front of her, and she was offering Evelyn a way out. The rain pattered softly against the pavement, the distant wail of sirens lost in the wind. Evelyn had seconds to decide. She could take Celeste's hand, disappear into the unknown, and finally get the truth. Or she could fight, stall for time, and stick to the plan. But whose plan? Cross's voice was suddenly in her ear again, the signal cutting back through static. Evelyn do not trust her. She inhaled sharply. They were back online. Celeste's smirk widened slightly. Your leash just tightened, didn't it? Evelyn's fingers twitched. She felt the weight of her gun holstered at her side. She could go for it. End this now. But Celeste was watching, waiting, calculating. And Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to end it. Not yet. You think you know me? Evelyn finally said, voice steady. Celeste tilted her head. I think I know exactly what you are, love. A survivor. Just like me. She stepped closer. Evelyn didn't move. You think Cross and Monroe are your allies? Celeste continued, lowering her voice just enough to pull Evelyn in. Have they told you the truth? Have they told you why they really chose you? Why you? Evelyn wanted to push, wanted to tell Celeste she was wrong. But she couldn't. Because the truth was, she had wondered. Since the day they threw her into this mission, something hadn't added up. Why take a journalist? A civilian? Why not an agent already in the field? Celeste saw the hesitation, and she pounced. You were never meant to win this game, she whispered. Just play your part. Evelyn's stomach twisted. The sirens grew closer. The agency was coming. She looked at Celeste, at her outstretched hand. A choice. Betray the agency or let Celeste escape. Her heart pounded. Then, before she could stop herself, she turned and ran. Evelyn darted toward the bridge's edge, slipping on the wet pavement, heart slamming against her ribs. Celeste's voice rang out behind her, sharp and amused. Wrong choice, love. A gunshot exploded. Evelyn dove forward as a bullet grazed past her shoulder, pain searing through her skin. She hit the railing hard, flipped over, and plunged into the freezing river below. The shock stole her breath, the impact rattling through her bones. Dark water swallowed her whole. She forced herself to fight, kicking upward, arms burning, lungs screaming for air. She broke the surface just in time to see Celeste vanishing into the night. The sirens reached the bridge. Agency vehicles screeched to a halt. Monroe's voice cut into her ear. Where is she? Evelyn gasped, treading water, rain slamming down around her. She had let Celeste go. She had chosen wrong. Or had she? She forced herself to whisper the only thing she could. She's gone. The agency's safe house was cold, sterile. A concrete bunker buried beneath the city. Evelyn sat on the edge of a steel-framed cot, her wet hair dripping onto the floor. The wound on her shoulder had been treated, but the pain was still there, a reminder. She was alive. But she had failed. The door creaked open. Cross stepped in first. His face was unreadable. Monroe followed. Her jaw was clenched tight with barely contained fury. Evelyn braced herself. Monroe didn't waste time. You let her escape. Evelyn met her glare. I didn't have a choice. Bullshit. Monroe stepped closer. You hesitated. Evelyn swallowed. Because she told me things you haven't. Cross crossed his arms. Like what? Evelyn's pulse pounded. Like why I was chosen for this mission in the first place. Silence. Monroe didn't react. Too controlled. Too careful. Cross looked at her, something flickering in his expression. Evelyn saw it then. The truth. She took a slow breath. You didn't pick me because I look like Celeste. Her voice was quiet. Dangerous. You picked me because I'm connected to her. Monroe's silence confirmed it. Evelyn's breath hitched. Tell me. Cross exhaled. It's not that simple. Evelyn's fingers curled into fists. Make it simple. A pause. Then, Monroe's voice finally breaking through the tension. Celeste Noir is your sister. The world tilted. Evelyn's pulse stopped. She stared. What? Monroe's blue eyes held no emotion. You weren't supposed to know. We were going to tell you when the time was right. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Celeste, the world's most wanted woman, was her blood? Her voice cracked. That's why you needed me. Cross didn't look at her. She's not just a criminal, Evelyn. She's a ghost, and you were the only way to bring her out. Evelyn's stomach twisted. It had never been about stopping Celeste. It had always been about using Evelyn to find her. Celeste's words echoed in her head. They don't want to stop me. They want to replace me. The pieces clicked. And for the first time, Evelyn didn't know who the enemy was. Evelyn sat in stunned silence. The words still echoed in her skull, looping over and over like a broken transmission. Celeste Noir is your sister. She clenched her jaw, trying to push past the static in her mind, the rush of emotions threatening to pull her under. Rage, confusion, betrayal. Cross and Monroe stood across from her, their postures rigid, waiting for her response. She slowly raised her gaze, her voice raw. How long have you known? Cross hesitated. Too long. Monroe didn't. Since the beginning. Evelyn's fingers curled into fists. And you didn't think to tell me? Monroe's expression didn't change. It wasn't relevant. Evelyn let out a hollow laugh. Not relevant? Her eyes snapped across. You've been using me like a bloodhound, leading me to Celeste. And you call that not relevant? Cross sighed, rubbing his temple. It's not that simple. Then make it simple. Evelyn stood, her chair scraping against the cold concrete floor. Her pulse pounded. Tell me everything. No more lies. No more games. A beat of silence. Then, Cross exhaled and sat on the table's edge. You were never supposed to know? He admitted. Your mother was a high-level asset, working deep undercover. Celeste and you were separated as infants, hidden under different identities. When your mother was killed, Evelyn's stomach twisted. Killed? Monroe nodded. 25 years ago, a hit, executed flawlessly. Celeste witnessed it, and from that moment on, she disappeared. Evelyn felt like she was drowning. Her whole life, she had believed her mother had died in a car accident. A lie. Celeste vanished, built her empire, and we lost track of her for years. Cross continued. But when we found you, you used me, Evelyn whispered. Monroe didn't flinch. We needed a way to draw her out. Evelyn's vision blurred with fury. This wasn't just about taking down Celeste Noir. This was personal. For both of them. And now, she was the one caught in the middle. Evelyn needed air. She stormed out of the briefing room, down the dim corridors of the safe house, ignoring Cross calling after her. She didn't stop until she reached a small, abandoned archive room. A single dim light flickered above as she grabbed the nearest metal filing cabinet and ripped it open. Old mission logs, intel reports. She flipped through pages until she found it. Her mother's case file. Her breath caught. A black and white surveillance photo of a woman, dark auburn hair, sharp eyes that mirrored her own. The headline. Status, terminated. A deep cold settled in her chest. There, listed under surviving relatives, Celeste Noir, real name, Celeste Carter. Evelyn felt like the walls were closing in. Her mother had been murdered. Her sister had been turned into a ghost. And Evelyn? She had been left in the dark. She gripped the edges of the file, her breath shaky. She had spent her life chasing the wrong truth. Now, She was done being a pawn. The door opened behind her. Evelyn didn't turn. "Talk fast, Cross," she muttered. "I'm not in the mood." Cross exhaled. "I know this is a lot." She let out a dry laugh. That's one way to put it. Silence stretched between them. Then, Cross lowered his voice. "Evelyn, if Celeste really wanted you dead, she would have killed you already." She froze. The thought had been lingering in the back of her mind since that night on the bridge. Celeste had a clear shot. She could have ended it, but she didn't. Instead, she let Evelyn live. Not out of mercy, out of strategy. Evelyn turned slowly. "You think she's waiting for something?" Cross nodded. "And whatever it is, it involves you." A tense beat. Then Evelyn squared her shoulders. "Then I need to find her first." Cross frowned. "That's not how this works." "That's exactly how this works." Evelyn stepped forward. "You used me to track her down, but now? She's coming for me." She grabbed her jacket. "If I want the truth," she said, "I need to hear it from her." Monroe stepped into the room, arms crossed. "You're making a mistake." Evelyn smirked. "Probably." Then she walked past them. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was done playing their game. Now, she was making her own moves. The world outside the agency's safe house was cold, unforgiving, and full of unseen dangers. Evelyn had spent weeks being trained, shaped into something lethal. But this time, there was no mission briefing, no backup, no safety net. She was on her own. The city stretched before her, its neon lights casting eerie reflections against the wet pavement. Somewhere in the chaos, Celeste was waiting, and Evelyn intended to find her. She hailed a cab, sliding into the back seat, her pulse steady. "Where to?" the driver asked. Evelyn hesitated. She didn't know where Celeste was, but she knew exactly where to start looking. "Take me to the Mirabelle Hotel." The Mirabelle Hotel was a 5-star ghost town. Elegant, lavish, and eerily quiet. The kind of place people disappeared in. Evelyn moved through the gilded lobby, her heels clicking softly against the marble. She wasn't sure why Celeste would choose a place like this. But maybe that was the point. At the concierge desk, a young man looked up, clearly startled by her presence. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Evelyn didn't blink. "I need the penthouse." The concierge paled slightly. "The penthouse is reserved for private clientele, I'm afraid." She slid a single black playing card across the counter. The man's breath hitched. Recognition. Evelyn had no idea what the card meant, but Celeste had left it behind in Monaco. And if it was hers, it meant power. The man hesitated, then pressed a hidden button beneath the desk. A soft beep. An elevator door behind the concierge slid open. Evelyn exhaled. Showtime. She stepped inside. The moment the doors closed, she reached for her gun, only to feel the cold steel of a blade pressed against her ribs. "Easy now, love." Evelyn froze. Celeste was behind her. Close. Too close. She could feel her breath against her neck. Celeste chuckled softly. "I was wondering how long it'd take before you came looking for me." Evelyn's grip on her gun tightened. Celeste tusked. "If you draw, you die. And I'd hate to waste all that training they gave you." The elevator slowed to a stop. Celeste stepped back, twirling the knife between her fingers. Effortless. Deadly. The doors slid open. "Come in," Celeste said, turning with a casual smirk. "Let's talk." The penthouse was a fortress, disguised as luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but Evelyn had no doubt the glass was bulletproof. A fire crackled in the fireplace, casting long, flickering shadows. Celeste poured herself a drink at the bar, unconcerned. "Whiskey?" she offered. Evelyn didn't answer. Celeste smirked. "Suit yourself." She took a slow sip before setting the glass down and leaning against the counter. "All right," she said, all amusement gone. "You found me. Now tell me, what is it you think you want?" Evelyn's pulse pounded. "You're my sister." Celeste's lips curled slightly. "Took them long enough to tell you." Evelyn's fists clenched. "You knew?" Celeste shrugged. "Of course I knew. But I also knew what they'd do if I told you first." Evelyn swallowed hard. Which is? Celeste's gray eyes sharpened. Turn you against me! A beat of silence. Then Evelyn exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You're a criminal, Celeste. You kill people. You sell weapons. Celeste chuckled. And they don't? Evelyn's breath hitched. You think Cross and Monroe are the good guys? Celeste tilted her head. I hate to break it to you, darling, but we were trained by the same people. The only difference? I left. Evelyn stared at her. You're lying. Celeste sighed. Am I? She took another sip of her drink, then tossed a file onto the coffee table. Take a look, she said. Evelyn hesitated. Then she stepped forward, flipping it open. Inside were dozens of classified documents. Agency kill lists, Black Ops missions, names of people who had been eliminated by Cross and Monroe's orders, including their mother. Evelyn's stomach turned to ice. She flipped to the last page, and her own name stared back at her. Status, pending termination. Her breath caught. They were never going to let you live, Evie, Celeste murmured, watching her reaction. Evelyn's hands shook. She looked up at Celeste. You knew, Celeste nodded. And that's why I never killed you. Evelyn felt like she was suffocating. Everything. She had believed every mission, every briefing, every truth the agency had fed her. It had all been a lie. She had never been their asset. She had been their insurance, a pawn, a means to an end. And now she had two choices. She could go back, play along, pretend she didn't know, or she could burn it all down. Celeste studied her, waiting. Decide quickly, little sister, she said, because the clock is running out. Evelyn's hands shook as she stared down at the file. Her name, pending termination. Everything Celeste had told her, everything she had feared but refused to believe, was laid out in black and white. The agency had never planned to let her live. She had never been a soldier in their war. She had been a tool, a weapon to be used, then discarded. Across the room, Celeste watched her in silence, swirling her whiskey, waiting. Now, do you see? Celeste said softly. Evelyn's stomach churned. How long? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Celeste arched an eyebrow. How long what? How long have they been planning to kill me? Celeste sighed, setting her drink down. The moment you stopped being useful. Evelyn clenched her jaw. And you just let it happen? Celeste's expression darkened. You think I wanted this? She snapped. You think I wanted my sister to be turned into their next asset? You were a child, Evelyn. You had a life. You weren't supposed to be dragged into this. Evelyn's pulse pounded. But you were? Celeste's smirk was bitter. I never had a choice, she said. But you? You did. Until they took that from you. Evelyn felt like the walls were closing in. She thought about Cross. Monroe. The agency. Had they ever told her the truth? Had any of it been real? She had spent her entire life believing she was on the right side. Now? She wasn't sure there even was a right side. Her fingers tightened into fists. Celeste watched her, her voice quieter now. You don't have to let them decide for you anymore, Evie. Evelyn looked up, and for the first time, she realized Celeste wasn't the enemy. The agency was. Her breath steadied. Then, slowly, she closed the file. Her voice was quiet, but firm. Then let's burn them to the ground. The moment the words left her mouth, Celeste's smirk widened. Now you're speaking my language, she murmured. She turned toward a hidden panel in the wall, pressing a small button. A section of the penthouse wall slid open, revealing a high-tech command center. Screens flickered with intercepted agency communications, surveillance feeds, and mission intel the agency had never shown Evelyn. How long have you been preparing for this? Evelyn asked, stepping forward. Celeste chuckled. Long enough. Evelyn's gaze drifted across the monitors. One caught her eye a live feed of Monroe and Cross. They were in a dark briefing room, standing in front of a screen displaying Evelyn's face. Celeste pressed a button, activating the audio. Monroe's voice came through the speakers. She's compromised. If she doesn't come back in, we eliminate her. Evelyn's breath caught. Cross didn't respond right away. Then, she won't come back in. Monroe's lips tightened. Then we take her out. Evelyn felt her stomach turn. Celeste tapped a button, muting the audio. Still think you can reason with them? Evelyn didn't answer. Because she knew the truth now. There was no reasoning. No going back. She had made her choice. And now, she was going to make them regret ever pulling her into this. She exhaled sharply, straightening. Tell me what we need to do. Celeste grinned. That's my girl. Celeste moved to a digital display, bringing up an interactive blueprint of the agency's black site. This is their main operations hub, she said. It's where they store intel, classified assets, and, more importantly, contingency files. Evelyn's brow furrowed. Contingency files? Celeste's gray eyes gleamed. Dirt, love, on everyone, including the agency's most powerful players. Evelyn's stomach twisted. You want to leak it? Celeste's smirk was razor sharp. I want to rip the whole damn thing apart. Evelyn's pulse pounded. The plan was simple. Infiltrate the black site. Extract the contingency files? Expose the agency. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was exactly what needed to happen. She exhaled. How do we get in? Celeste tapped the screen. Simple. A satellite feed of the black site flickered into view. Inside that facility, Celeste murmured, is someone who wants out. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Who? Celeste smirked. Agent Damien Cross. Evelyn's chest tightened. No, she said immediately. Celeste arched an eyebrow. No? Cross is agency. He's loyal. Celeste shrugged. Not as loyal as you think. Evelyn's mind reeled. She had worked with Cross for weeks. He had trained her, guided her. He had lied to her, but had it been out of duty? Or had he been trapped in the same web she had? Celeste leaned against the table. You want to take them down? You're going to need someone on the inside. Evelyn's pulse thrummed. This was it. Her next move. And this time, she was going to play the game her way. She met Celeste's gaze. Then let's go get Cross. Celeste grinned. Now we're having fun. Evelyn stood on the rooftop of an abandoned industrial complex, the cold wind whipping against her face. Below her, the city pulsed with life, unaware that somewhere beneath the streets, one of the most secure black sites in the world held the key to everything, Cross. Celeste stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the facility through a high-powered scope. Your boy looks comfortable in his little prison, Celeste murmured, adjusting the focus. Evelyn exhaled sharply, steadying herself. He's not my boy, Celeste smirked. Keep telling yourself that, love. She handed Evelyn the scope. Evelyn took it reluctantly, pressing it to her eye. Through the thermal imaging, she saw him. Agent Damien Cross, sitting in a reinforced cell, hands cuffed, head tilted back against the wall. Still alive. For now. Evelyn's grip tightened. Cross had trained her, lied to her, used her. But if what Celeste said was true, if he wasn't as loyal to the agency as she thought, then he might be their only chance to break in. She lowered the scope. How do we get him out? Celeste's smirk widened. Oh, darling, that's the easy part. The black site was buried beneath an abandoned government building, reinforced with biometric security, armed guards, and tech so advanced it made the Pentagon look outdated. But Celeste? She had planned for this. Evelyn crouched behind an unmarked van, heart hammering as Celeste worked on a hijacked surveillance terminal. Security is rotating every 90 seconds, Celeste murmured. Once I override their internal scan, we'll have a window. Evelyn glanced toward the heavily guarded entry point. This is insane, Celeste grinned. Now you're catching on. She pressed a button on a small device and, suddenly, the surveillance feed froze. That's our cue, Celeste said. Move. They sprinted across the open lot, slipping through a side maintenance hatch, just as alarms began a soft diagnostic reset. They were inside. Evelyn's pulse raced. This was suicide. But for the first time, she wasn't running from it. She was running toward it. The underground corridors were cold, sterile, humming with quiet menace. Celeste moved ahead, fluid and controlled, bypassing 2 security doors before stopping at a reinforced checkpoint. She turned to Evelyn. "You get to do this part." Evelyn frowned. "What part?" Celeste smirked, handing her a stolen agency keycard. "Convince them. You're still one of them." Evelyn's stomach twisted, but she knew Celeste was right. Taking a deep breath, she swiped the keycard and stepped forward. The 2 armed guards snapped to attention, their eyes narrowing. "Agent Carter?" One of them frowned. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn forced her expression into something resembling authority. "New orders. I need access to Cross." The second guard hesitated. "That's above our clearance, Director Monroe is sending me in personally," Evelyn interrupted, injecting just enough impatience into her tone to make it believable. She held up a forged, digital authorization other of Celeste tricks. "Or would you rather I tell Monroe you delayed me?" The guards exchanged glances. Then one of them pressed the release switch. The security door hissed open. Evelyn's pulse pounded. She was in. She stepped inside and came face to face with Damien Cross. Cross sat on the edge of his cot, watching her with unreadable eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cross sighed. "Well, I didn't expect to see you again." Evelyn folded her arms. "Yeah, well, I didn't expect you to be next on the kill list." Cross smirked slightly, but there was something tired in his expression. "Monroe thinks I'm compromised," he said, "which means I have maybe 2 hours before she orders me buried in an unmarked grave." Evelyn's fingers twitched. So Celeste wasn't lying. She took a slow step closer. "Did you know?" Cross's jaw tightened. "Did I know what?" "That they were going to kill me." Silence. Then Cross looked away. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "You did." Cross exhaled. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "What way? Me dying at the end of a mission? Being another one of Monroe's cleanups?" Cross finally met her gaze. "I tried to stop it." Her breath caught. "You were never supposed to be a pawn, Evelyn," Cross said, his voice quieter now. "I tried to protect you, but Monroe doesn't take chances. Once you started asking questions." He trailed off. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was something worse. The realization that Cross had been fighting for her, even when she hadn't known it. She swallowed hard. "Then, help me finish this." Cross studied her. "You're really doing this?" Evelyn nodded. "We're exposing them," she said. "All of it. The kill lists, the black sites, the missions they've erased from history." She hesitated. "And you?" Cross let out a slow breath. "I should tell you to walk away." Evelyn tilted her head. "But you won't." A flicker of a smirk. "Number I won't." He stood, stretching his shoulders. "All right, Carter, let's burn this place down." Evelyn grinned. "Now we're talking." Celeste was already working when they reached her. She barely glanced up. "Ah, look who joined the rebellion." Cross shot her a dry look. "You're enjoying this too much." Celeste grinned. "Oh, you have no idea." She tossed him a gun, then turned back to the terminal. "In 3 minutes, I'm triggering an internal security lockdown. Every door will seal, every system will fry, and every agent in this building will be scrambling." She glanced at Evelyn. "That's our window." Cross nodded. "We take the elevator shaft to sublevel 3. There's a restricted exit transport tunnel leading out of the city." Evelyn smirked. "Perfect." Celeste flicked the final switch. "Then let's make some noise." The alarms erupted. The facility plunged into chaos. And the real war had just begun. The alarms blared through the facility, drowning out the pounding of Evelyn's heartbeat. Security lights flashed red, casting eerie shadows as sirens screamed through the corridors. They had 2 minutes before the agency locked everything down. Evelyn gritted her teeth and ran. Celeste was ahead, moving fast, her twin pistols flashing as she took down 2 approaching guards. Cross followed, keeping pace, his weapon steady in his hands. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. They weren't running anymore. They were taking the fight straight to the agency. The corridor stretched before them, lined with reinforced glass wall-shy security detention cells. Inside, prisoners stirred, watching as Evelyn, Celeste, and Cross tore through the facility. Gunfire erupted behind them. More guards, more obstacles. Celeste glanced back. "We need to move faster!" Cross pointed ahead. "Elevator shaft 20 meters!" Evelyn's chest burned as she pushed forward, ducking beneath a hail of bullets. Celeste reached the control panel first, slapping a remote detonator onto the wall. "Hold on," she called. The explosion ripped through the air, shattering glass, collapsing the corridor behind them in a storm of smoke and fire. Evelyn coughed, waving away dust as the dust settled. They had just cut off pursuit, but it wouldn't last long. She turned to Cross. "Open the shaft." Cross nodded, moving to the emergency override. The elevator doors groaned, then slid open, revealing a dark, steel-lined tunnel dropping into oblivion. "That's a long way down," Evelyn muttered. Celeste grinned. "Good thing we're not taking the stairs." She clipped the repelling cable onto the edge of the shaft and vaulted over the side. Evelyn exhaled. This was insane. Then again, so was everything else. She grabbed the second cable, clipped in, and jumped. The air rushed past her as she slid down into the abyss. Seconds later, Cross followed. As they descended, a new alarm blared. Celeste cursed. "They're cutting power!" Evelyn's stomach lurched. "Which means," Cross's voice was grim, "we're running out of time." At the bottom of the shaft, they hit the ground running. The sublevel was a maze of underground tunnels, leading to the secret transport exit. They were so close. Then a voice crackled over the intercoms. Cold. Controlled. "Director Monroe, you really think this ends with you winning?" Evelyn's steps faltered. Monroe's voice was calm, but dripping with venom. "You've made a mistake, Carter, and mistakes have consequences." A horrifying realization hit Evelyn. "She's not talking to me," she murmured. Celeste's face darkened. She turned to Cross. "She's talking to you." Cross's jaw clenched. Monroe's voice cut through the intercom like a knife. "I trusted you, Cross." A chilling pause. "Now I have to bury you." Suddenly, the security doors at the end of the tunnel slammed shut. Heavy reinforced steel. They were trapped. Evelyn spun toward Cross. "Tell me you have a way out." Cross's eyes flicked to the control panel. "They're overriding the manual release." Celeste's voice was sharp. "Which means," Cross exhaled, "we have 60 seconds before they gas this entire level." Evelyn's chest tightened. They weren't just trying to trap them. They were trying to erase them. Her mind raced. Think, adapt, survive. Her gaze snapped to the main power conduit running along the ceiling. If she could short the system, she could force the doors open, but it would leave them exposed. No time. "Cover me!" she shouted. Celeste and Cross moved without hesitation. Evelyn ripped a live wire from a panel, sparks erupting as she jammed it against the power relay. The lights flickered. The doors groaned. Then, the emergency lockdown failed. The tunnel door slid open. They were free. "Go!" Celeste barked. They raced forward, sprinting for the transport tunnel. Behind them, the gas flooded in. Too close. Too damn close. The transport bay was empty, save for a single escape vehicle, a black armored SUV. Evelyn's pulse pounded. "Get in!" Celeste yanked open the driver's door, hopping inside. Evelyn and Cross followed. Then the gunshot rang out. Evelyn jerked forward, hitting the ground hard. Pain exploded in her shoulder. A second shot slammed into Cross's vest, knocking him back. Evelyn gritted her teeth, rolling onto her side, and saw Monroe standing at the tunnel entrance, a smoking pistol in her hand. Celeste fired first. The bullet slammed into Monroe's shoulder, knocking her backward. But Monroe didn't go down. She pressed a hand to her wound, breathing hard, then lifted her gun again. "End of the line, Carter." Monroe spat. Evelyn forced herself up, blood soaking her sleeve. She met Monroe's gaze. "You first." Then she raised her weapon and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit its mark. Monroe staggered, collapsing against the wall, her breath hitching. Her gun slipped from her fingers. She fell. Silence. Evelyn exhaled sharply, pain thrumming through her body. Celeste grabbed her wrist, pulling her into the SUV. Now or never, love. Evelyn barely had time to process before Celeste slammed the accelerator. The tires screeched, smoke billowing as they tore through the tunnel. Behind them, the entire facility went up in flames. The black SUV roared down an empty highway, headlights cutting through the darkness. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, blood seeping through her jacket, her hands trembling against the adrenaline crash. Celeste drove with one hand on the wheel, the other casually resting near her pistol. Cross sat in the back, grimacing as he pressed a cloth against his bruised ribs. No one spoke, because they had done it. The agency was in ruins. Monroe was dead. And yet, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not yet. The SUV pulled off the main road, disappearing into a desolate safe house deep in the mountains. Celeste parked, killed the engine, and exhaled. No alarms, no pursuit. For now, Evelyn pushed open her door and stumbled out, her legs weak beneath her. Celeste caught her before she collapsed. "Easy, love." Evelyn swayed slightly, the gunshot wound in her shoulder throbbing. Celeste helped her inside. The safe house was small, barely furnished, but stocked with supplies. Cross grabbed a med kit from a metal crate. "Sit down," he muttered. Evelyn glared at him. "I'm fine." Cross arched an eyebrow. "Sure you are." He handed her a painkiller and a water bottle. She took it without argument. Celeste leaned against the counter, watching them both. "So what now?" she asked. Evelyn wiped blood from her sleeve. "We finish it." Celeste smirked. "And here I thought you'd want to disappear." Evelyn met her gaze. "Not until the world knows the truth." Celeste's eyes gleamed. "Atta girl." The room was silent except for the hum of the laptop. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She had one shot to expose everything. The contingency files, the black site data wrething the agency had hidden for years. She uploaded the files onto a secured server, bypassing firewalls with the backdoor code Celeste had given her. Cross sat across from her, arms crossed. "Are you sure about this?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes." She hit send. The data rushed through encrypted channels, spreading to journalists, whistleblowers, global intelligence leaks. The truth was out. Celeste let out a low whistle. "Well," she said, "that should shake a few governments." Evelyn exhaled. They had just declared war on every shadow operation in the world. There was no going back now. The news hit within hours. Every major outlet exploded with headlines. Black Ops Agency exposed in global data leak. Cover-ups, assassinations, and secret prisons revealed. Government denies involvement. Investigations launched. Evelyn sat in front of the screen, watching the chaos unfold. Her entire life had been rewritten in a matter of keystrokes. She felt numb. Cross walked in, reading the news over her shoulder. "You did it," he said. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Then why doesn't it feel like a win?" Silence. Then Celeste's voice, soft and knowing. "Because we're still alive." Evelyn turned. Celeste's gray eyes were unreadable. "We may have burned them," Celeste said, "but they'll rebuild. They always do." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "You're saying this isn't over?" Celeste smirked. "It never is." Later that night, Evelyn stepped onto the cabin's balcony, looking out over the dark mountains. Cross joined her, hands shoved into his pockets. "You okay?" Evelyn let out a dry chuckle. "I don't even know what that means anymore." Cross leaned against the railing. "For what it's worth," he said, "I never wanted you to go through this." Evelyn sighed. "But you knew I had to." Cross nodded. They stood in silence. Then Celeste stepped outside, holding a burner phone. "We need to go." Evelyn turned. "Why?" Celeste's smirk faded. "Because I just got word." Evelyn's pulse spiked. "From who?" Celeste's gray eyes flickered with something dangerous. "From someone worse than Monroe." Evelyn's breath hitched. There was someone else. Someone bigger. Cross exhaled sharply. "Then I guess we're not done yet." Evelyn's fingers tightened into fists. They had burned one empire, but another was waiting in the shadows. She straightened. Then she turned away from the balcony, stepping back into the light. "Let's finish this." The world knew the truth. The agency was in ruins, its secrets exposed. But Evelyn, Celeste, and Cross weren't safe. Because somewhere out there, someone was still pulling the strings. And they wanted them dead. Celeste's phone call had been brief and cryptic. A single name, a single location. Prague. The final battlefield. The jet touched down in the dead of night, landing on a private airstrip just outside the city. Evelyn stepped off the plane, her body bruised, but her mind sharper than ever. Cross followed, his usual cool demeanor masking the exhaustion beneath. Celeste walked ahead, the ghost of a smirk playing on her lips. "Feels poetic, doesn't it?" she murmured. "Ending it where it all began." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Celeste stopped, her expression unreadable. "The man we're after," she said. "He's the one who ordered our mother's execution." Evelyn's breath caught. The final piece of the puzzle. Her voice came out quiet. "Who is he?" Celeste's gaze flickered to the towering skyline. The architect. A shadowy figure, never seen, never named. The true mastermind behind the agency. Evelyn's fingers tightened into fists. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. The safe house in Prague was a temporary Situpa place to plan their final move. Celeste spread out a blueprint of a heavily guarded estate. "The architect has an underground facility beneath this mansion," she said. "That's where he operates from." Evelyn's eyes traced the security layer's thermal scanners, biometric locks, armed guards at every entry point. Cross leaned against the table. "So what's the play?" Celeste grinned. "We go loud." Evelyn exhaled. No more subtlety. No more deception. This was a war. They had one night to end it. And there would be no second chances. The estate was a fortress. Guards patrolled the perimeter. Drones hovered overhead. And the underground vault where the architect operated was locked behind layers of reinforced steel. But Evelyn, Celeste, and Cross, they weren't walking in the front door. They came through the storm. As the city plunged into a blackout, the first explosion ripped through the side of the estate. Gunfire erupted as security forces scrambled. Celeste moved like a ghost, eliminating targets with silenced precision. Cross covered their flank, his rifle barking as he dropped guards before they even saw him. Evelyn forged ahead, her breath steady, her gun an extension of her own will. They carved a path of destruction toward the underground facility. But the architect? He was waiting. The vault doors slid open, revealing a massive control room. Monitors displayed dozens of secret operations, each one proof that the agency's reach wasn't gone, it had just gone deeper underground. And standing in the center, a man in a tailored black suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. He didn't look like a killer. But Evelyn knew better. "Ah," he said, his voice smooth. "The Carter sisters. Finally." Evelyn raised her gun. "You're done," she said. The architect smiled. "No," he said softly. "I've already won." He tapped a button on his wristwatch. The monitors flickered. Live security feeds flashed onto the screens. Hundreds of operatives. Hundreds of agents. His voice was calm. "Kill me, and another takes my place. This isn't a battle, Miss Carter. This is an institution. And institutions don't die." Evelyn's chest tightened. Celeste took a slow step forward, her pistol leveled. "But men do," she whispered. The architect smirked. "You're right," he said. "They do." Then he pressed the second button. Self-destruct sequence activated. Evelyn's pulse spiked. The architect tilted his head, watching her. "If I go down," he murmured, "so do all of you." The facility trembled, alarms wailing. Explosions rocked the foundation, debris crashing down. Evelyn's mind raced. They had seconds to decide. Celeste's grip tightened on the trigger. "Let me kill him!" Evelyn hesitated. Killing him wouldn't stop the machine he built. But letting him live? That wasn't an option either. She turned to Cross. "Get to the exit," she ordered. Cross's jaw clenched. "Not without you." Celeste's eyes darkened. "Evie, we don't have time for this." Evelyn moved. She grabbed Celeste's wrist, redirecting her shot. The bullet slammed into the architect's knee, sending him crashing to the floor. Celeste stared at her. Evelyn's voice was cold. "No easy deaths." She turned, racing toward the exit. Celeste and Cross followed as the underground facility collapsed. They reached the final escape corridor just as the world behind them erupted in fire. Evelyn looked back one last time. The architect lay motionless, his empire crumbling around him. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Carter was free. Days later, a safe house somewhere on the coast. Evelyn sat on the balcony watching the sunrise. The agency was gone. The truth was out. And yet, the world, it kept moving. Celeste stepped outside, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. She handed one to Evelyn and smirked. "So," she said, "what now?" Evelyn exhaled. She had spent her whole life following orders, living in the shadows of men who saw her as nothing but a pawn. Not anymore. She looked at Celeste and smiled. "Whatever the hell we want."